Good afternoon, and welcome to our latest installment of the APICS Southeast District webinar series, part of Supply Chain Now radio programming. My name is Scott Luton. I serve as your host for today's session. I also serve as Executive Vice President of APICS Atlanta, as well as a volunteer on the APICS Southeast District staff. Our session today will focus on what may be an uncomfortable topic for many supply chain professionals, tackling gender issues in the workplace. But if we aren't getting out of our comfort zones and engaging in difficult conversations, then we certainly aren't making enough progress. We have an exceptional guest speaker today in Elba Pareja-Gallagher, founder of Show Me 50 and chair of APICS Atlanta's Gender Gap Task Force. We'll share more about her background in just a moment, but as always, we are glad that you've chosen to join us here today. So first, let's tackle our ground rules. All attendees will be on mute as we're looking to optimize the audio experience. Now, with that said, we do want to make it as interactive as possible. So please do submit your questions via the chat toolbar. We'll answer as many as we have time for at the conclusion of today's webinar. Finally, a PDF of today's presentation and the recording will be sent out in the next few days to each of our registrants. As I mentioned, APICS is your host for today's webinar. For those of you new to APICS, we are the premier industry association dedicated to end-to-end supply chain management. Our organization offers membership and professional development, a wide range of education opportunities, industry-leading research and publications, and widely recognized professional certifications. But more than anything else, APICS is about people. Our organization has over 45,000 members in over 100 countries. APICS has 195 North American chapters that serve a wide variety of key geographic markets, including our newest chapter in the dynamic logistics market of Savannah, Georgia. You may recognize our leading certifications such as our CPIM, our CSCP, and our newest certification, our CLTD. If you want more information on how we can serve you or your organization, please feel free to reach out to APICS directly or those of us on the APICS Southeast District staff. We are happy to help. Okay, so let's share a little more information about our speaker today. Elba Pareja-Gallagher is a fellow member of the APICS community, a member of the APICS Atlanta chapter, and she's CSCP certified. She is also a finance generalist with more than 18 years of experience at UPS, having held roles in international finance, investor relations, marketing, and strategy. Currently, she serves as Director of Finance on the B2C strategy team. Elba is also a social impact entrepreneur as founder of ShowMe50.org, an organization she launched in 2015 whose vision is to achieve 50% women leading corporate America. Show Me 50's focus is to teach individuals how to influence change at work in gender bias awareness, talent management, workplace flexibility, and executive accountability. As I mentioned, she is an APICS certified supply chain professional and is a member of a variety of professional organizations in Atlanta. Our APICS Atlanta Board of Directors is very pleased to have Elba chair our new Gender Gap Task Force, where she leads a team of volunteers and our chapter at moving the needle and attacking the gender gap in industry in our area. Please note the views and opinions that are shared today are all Elba's and Elba's alone. With that said, here is Elba Pareja-Gallagher. And Elba, if you can hear me, we may be having an audio disconnection. I don't think we can hear you. There we are.
Okay, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, great. Sorry about that. Those gremlins, technical gremlins. So I'm very excited to be here and thrilled to be working with APICS. It's a terrific organization to really help educate the business community on supply chain. We are going to go ahead and get started. This is a very timely topic. I think we've seen a lot of information in the news, and it's a great time to really talk about how do we talk about gender at work when issues come up when we least expect it. How can we prepare ourselves to have those honest, open conversations to really move progress forward. So we're going to cover some practical tips for men and women when gender issues come up at work, so you don't feel like this guy who is walking on these hot coals. So how do we talk about gender at work, and do we talk about gender at work? So Scott, to make this a little interactive, I thought we'd use your polling functionality to see if we can ask the question. Can you cue up your polling for the audience? I've got a question here. And Scott, will you be able to pull that up?
Absolutely. And we're going to be, let's see, when was last time? Okay, so our first poll here is, when was the last time you brought up any gender issues at work? So if our audience would go ahead and take the next few seconds to vote, answer A, this month, answer B, this year, answer C, in the past, or answer D, never. So please vote now, and Elba, I'll read off the results here in about 10 seconds.
Sure. And really, you know, gender issues come up in a variety of ways. One might be that you are brought into a joke or a conversation that's uncomfortable. In other ways, that you might see things in the news and people start commenting about that at work.
Okay, and now I'm going to share the results. Elba, 8% answered A this month, 8% answered B this year, 23% answered C, in the past, and the majority answered D, never, at 62%.
Great. So thanks for that. And it does sort of support my thinking. And you know, when I'm out and about in the community and at work, at different kinds of business meetings, you know, people generally don't bring these issues up. And so, you know, why might they not, right? So in this image, you see that the woman thinks, well, gosh, if I bring anything up, you know, they might think I'm too sensitive. If it's about some type of joke or some type of comment that's interpreted as sexist or something. You know, another thing is that if it has to do with any type of policy issues that you may disagree with, you know, the person might think, hey, they're going to think that I want some kind of special treatment if I bring it up. Guys might think, you know what, they equate all this with things like gender quotas. They envision the women's liberation movement. You know, they feel overwhelmed. And so some people might say, you know, all this gender stuff, I feel like an endangered species. And I do hear that a lot, you know, when we have all these diversity discussions, it can be uncomfortable. And so what we do is that we sort of tend to ignore it, right? We ignore these situations. It's like the big elephant in the room, and we remain silent. And by the way, it's not only gender issues, but a lot of times, you know, it can be all sorts of issues, from general diversity topics to business issues too, that, you know, we tend to, rather than confront the issue, we tend to remain silent and not create any controversy. The thing about it is that lately, especially, every time we open the newspaper or we're listening to the radio, there seems to be an increased level of gender information in the news and in the headline. And so I think it's both, you know, a challenge, because how do we deal with it? But at the same time, it's an opportunity. And so what I thought I'd do is share some of the recent headlines and use that polling feature again to see where people stand and what they know, and if they've heard about some of the gender topics that have been in the news that have probably followed us around, certainly at home, at our dinner tables, into business meetings, and even at work. So if you can tee up the poll question, I'm going to show a picture. And Scott, I think you've got the question, right?
I sure do. And we're going to be sharing. All right, so the question of the picture that Elba shared: what company does this executive work for? So straight from the headlines. Answer A is Google. Answer B is Uber. Answer C is Qatar Airways. So please vote now. And we'll take the next 5 seconds or so, and Elba, we'll see how headline savvy our audience is today. Last call. Okay, we're going to close the poll and we'll share the results. Elba, 17% chose answer A, Google, 50% chose answer B, Uber, and 33% chose answer C, Qatar Airways.
Okay, great. So actually, this guy is from Uber. But before I give you his headline, I wanted to mention, I thought it was interesting on Qatar Airlines. You know, their big snafu was their CEO making a comment that the flight attendants on their airline are a young demographic versus in the American airlines, their grandmothers who are the flight attendants. And so he got in quite a bit of hot water over that. So this gentleman here is, this is from June, and this is David Borderman, and he was on the board of Uber. And of course, you may have heard that Uber got into some trouble for some sexist culture that they had in their company. And so during a board meeting, when one more woman had been elected to the board, added to the one they had, so they now have two, he had made the joke that, you know, now, you know, what this shows you is that there's going to be a lot more talking on the board. And so that was one question that hit the press. Let's look at another one. This one is really interesting. Someone said, you know, I bet she treats you well. And this was in the realm of compliments. And the interesting thing about this one, and it's a challenge for gender issues, is when it's a person of authority and power that can create a lot of risk for you saying anything, that's when it gets really tough. And so I'm not going to poll on this one, but this was an experience when the president had journalists in his office, and there were a lot of female journalists, and he called over this woman from an Irish newspaper and told her she had a nice smile, and as she's talking to the Irish Prime Minister, he told him that, hey, she's got a nice smile, I bet she treats you well. And so I'm categorizing this under the compliments area, and so we'll talk about that as an area that can create challenges as well. And we're going to have one more polling question, Scott, and if you can pull that up.
Absolutely. Okay, so if everyone saw the picture in the bottom right-hand corner, question is, what is this tech employee famous for? Answer A is leaking internal company gender statistics. Answer B is sexual harassment in his venture capital firm. And answer C is getting fired. So please take the next 5-6 seconds to vote, and we will share the results and keep marching on. So please
and this
vote.
was a very recent event, right? Just this month.
I thought you were going to say this morning, Elba. All right, last call. And we're going to close, and then we'll share the results here. So Elba, 33% answered the answer A, leaking internal company gender statistics. Answer B had 20%, and then 47%, a plurality, answered answer C, getting fired.
Okay, and so it is answer C. This was a Google tech employee who published a manifesto that went viral and ended up in him getting fired. And it's interesting, if you haven't read it, it's certainly worthwhile to take a look to see, you know, one person's opinion. And also, if you're interested, I wrote a blog on LinkedIn to talk about my interpretation and my comments around it. Believe it or not, there were a lot of things that I agreed with this gentleman about, and I think it's an interesting read. But some of the more controversial things that he said, which got him in hot water, was that he felt that women's biological differences contribute them to not being really sort of capable of being in the tech industry. And so I think that was one of the most inflammatory things he said. But there were some things that I do agree with. So you ought to check out my LinkedIn article about that. Okay, so now we know the kinds of things we're seeing on a daily basis. And so all of those topics probably made us a little uncomfortable, especially when you talk about people in positions of power making comments and not knowing what to do. Also, I think it's challenging when we start to get very technical and you feel like you don't have enough factual information to have an opinion. Okay, you know, the Google guy talked a lot about research and statistics, and you know, you feel like, well, gosh, I need to go read that. So it does create a certain level of uneasiness. And so our goal today is to basically give you a toolkit of sorts to provide you with some things to think about of how you might respond and react when you're confronted with situations that might make you uncomfortable. At the end of the day, this webinar isn't to give you instructions about anything or espouse one particular view or another, but it's really just to have you start thinking about, how do I want to prepare myself to respond and react to things I hear that happen to be around the gender topic at work or in my networking circles or even at home. So what we're going to do is we're going to give you some background. We're going to look at a few situations and give you some examples of responses that you might consider. And then at the end, you'll have access to all of the resources and the references that I use in preparing this material. So let's start a little bit in our background section about what drives our reactions. It starts from a position of fear, and when we're uncomfortable, we have fear and we're not sure the outcome, and so we're worried about how to proceed. When it comes to gender issues, jokes, comments, all these research, information that we hear, the first thing we may think is, wow, did I hear that correctly? Did I see it correctly? You don't want to respond to something and then realize it was your mistake, that you've misinterpreted something. So that's the first reason why we may choose not to speak up or get involved or engaged in a conversation. The next thing that we might feel is that we might feel like we're overreacting, right? And so we begin to second guess ourselves, and that, of course, is all related to fear as well. And then the third thing, which is very important, is we're going to ask ourselves, I may be penalized in some form or fashion if I do speak out. And I don't think it helps us when we see what happened to James the Google guy, who actually ended up being fired, right? But again, if you read my blog, you can kind of see how that may happen and how it can be prevented. So these are legitimate concerns and things that I think we really do need to consider. The other thing is, in preparing for this webinar, is that I read some research, and a gentleman from the Center for Cross-Cultural Research at Western Washington University has done some studies and found that even when we prepare ourselves and we think that we will react in a certain way, that there's a discrepancy between what people predict they're going to do and then what they're actually going to do. And that's why it's so important when it comes to gender conversations to start thinking about it and prepare yourself so you're not caught off guard. But it's a skill that we should all have for handling any type of work issue, right? You don't want to be caught without a planned escape path, so to speak. When we are evaluating whether or not to comment on a comment that makes us uncomfortable, you really have to evaluate the costs and benefits. Again, just like a business decision, you have to evaluate how this is going to be impacting you and your family. When you talk about the cost side of equations, in terms of issues that come up, you have to start by knowing the audience. Who is it that made the comment, and how do they affect your life, right? Is it a matter of potential job security? Sometimes it could even be safety issues. You really have to know who the audience is, and you have to think about what is their reaction going to be if I make a statement related to something I hear them say or I've seen them do. Are they going to be dismissive, or are they going to get defensive? We need to know the audience and then try to anticipate what kind of reaction are they going to have. Again, in doing some of the reading that I've done, I see that studies show that when women or people of color make the comment to sort of defend that position, they get more pushback when they're being assertive on a particular stand related to their own demographic. And so that's definitely something you have to consider, right? That goes to the penalties. Cost, am I going to be penalized because I'm speaking up? Is it going to affect my ability to do my job? And the other thing is the authority, right? Or if you're dealing with someone who's made a comment that's in a position of power, that is going to potentially have penalties and limit the perceptions of you at work or in your networking circles. But then you have to look at the benefit side as well, of course. And I think one of the primary, benefits is that it enables you to really stick up for your integrity, to live your values, and to reflect in your actions the kind of person that you are, right? It also enables you to change things for the better. It really matters when you're able to quickly address something that comes up, that the persons that you're working with understand that, gosh, maybe I need to think about the way about that, because it might not be the best approach. And then lastly, which is an interesting one, if you are in a leadership position, in a position of influence, you have a responsibility actually to step up and to comment on some things to prevent your own organization from getting into hot water. So we're going to go through a strategic checklist of some things that you can think about as you evaluate how to respond to gender topics that come up in your circles. The first one is that, you don't want to make assumptions. You want to give people the benefit of the doubt and assume positive intent. That's a great paradigm for just leading and managing, but it also certainly applies here. I heard someone use the term MRI, most respectful interpretation. So you want to give people the benefit of giving them the most respectful interpretation of what they've said or done, right? So it's, if somebody says something and, maybe it offends you, just don't jump to conclusions. Maybe they have no understanding of a particular topic, right? You have to have some compassion and really seek to understand. The second one is don't accuse. Anytime you use any ism words or ist words, people tend to have an exaggerated perception of what those words mean. And so you just don't want to go there. It's just not constructive to accuse people of having certain motivations. Explain your reaction to the comment. It always helps when you help people understand why you're bringing this up, right? Something made me feel uncomfortable. I'm confused by what you said. Something that lets them know that you're just interested in explaining yourself and understanding. A great technique is to ask a question, right? Why did you say that comment? What did you mean by this? You also want to use it as an opportunity to share information. So what I think that's great about the James Google Guide blog and his manifesto, and then all of the reaction we've seen since, is that it gives the opportunity for many subject matter experts to come out and share factual information and to keep the conversation going and weighing in on the issue. The next one is try alternative approaches, right? And basically, you just want to make sure that you don't it's just not black and white, right? Maybe you want to say things like, well, next time, you want to give them alternatives. Instead of saying it this way, say it this way. So think about alternative ways to strike a message over an issue that might offend you. And then this one is really, just call it out. Sometimes something is egregious enough that you just need to bring it out, make it short, not emotional, and just bring it out. And then the last one is one that you hope you never have to go to, which when things are really bad, you need to appeal to someone in authority. So the things to consider as you engage in these situations at work is, frankly, that you are at work. And the way that you respond in a professional situation is different than the way you might respond at home, right? So people are bringing different views to the office. They come from all kinds of geographical backgrounds, political backgrounds. And so when comments are made that might offend some people, maybe you are overly sensitive. And so I think you have to understand that at work, try to be the most inclusive and seek to understand so that you are including the most views at work. You also want to consider the company culture. A lot of companies are very casual, very relaxed. Quite honestly, a lot of companies have more of, maybe there's a lot more profanity used at certain cultures, and that's the way the culture is. And when you went to that company, you knew that's what the culture was like. And so you need to make sure that you're responding to the environment that you're in. right? So all of these things are important as you evaluate what to say and when to say it when you come into an uncomfortable gender situation. So we're going to jump in to some situations. And again, back to what was in the news before, we're sort of going to leverage some of those. So sometimes we are in situations where somebody makes a joke. And believe it or not, many times we think these days are over. And certainly nobody would say this at work, but it really does happen. And we see it in the headlines. So I went online and it's pretty interesting. So you can go and find all kinds of jokes. So here's one that I found when I Googled sexist jokes, right? And I found a clean one, right? So this says, is Google male or female? And so the answer is female because it doesn't let you finish a sentence before making a suggestion. And so I'm glad it's on mute, Scott, so I can't hear people laughing, right?
That's right.
Right? But this is an example of a joke that maybe some people might say that it's sexist, right? Because they're talking about a stereotype. Oh, women, talk too much. Another one is that someone makes a joke about women's capabilities being less than that of men. And James in his manifesto, he sort of was going there with his arguments over the biological capabilities of women. So these are some of the examples that you might encounter. So let's start with some examples if you want to start a dialogue, right? So again, back to weighing the costs and benefits, you're not always going to speak up. You're not going to feel that it's the right time or place, and you're going to weigh the costs and benefits, and you might choose to say nothing or to say something that won't create a dialogue. But if you wanted to sort of have a conversation with the person, these are some of the things you might say, right? You could just say, hey, I'm not following your joke. Why is that funny? And of course, it's all about the tone and your relationship with that person. But it causes them to sort of think twice and relive the joke or the comment in their mind and try to explain it. And then quickly they'll probably go, oh, I didn't think that it might, be offensive, right? You could also say, can you repeat that? What do you mean? And again, that just causes them, it's sort of what I call a bias interrupter, that you have suddenly interrupted them to sort of double back and say, oh, wow, I never thought of it that way. Another comment, particularly around where people are commenting on women's capabilities in this case. So, here's a good example. I know you didn't mean any harm, and we're just trying to lighten the mood with a joke. However, when you said that, it came across as derogatory to women. And I know that doesn't represent what you think about women. So I just want to make sure you knew that that's how that joke might be received. And again, you want to make it in a very collaborative way. There's no judgment here, but it's just a way to kind of start the conversation. Now, as I mentioned earlier, sometimes you don't want to start a conversation. And so in those cases, you can just change the topic. And that really makes a statement as well, right? So if somebody makes a joke that you're offended by, you can just change the subject. And if you do it right then, they'll know that you weren't in the boat on that comment, right? So you can say things, hey, let's talk about this, right? Or did you hear the story in this morning's news about this? What did you think when this happened? I've always wondered this, and it has nothing to do with the joke or the comment that someone made. So it just allows you to sort of change the topic in a very direct way. That, again, is another bias interrupter. Let's look at another situation. And I'm calling this one the gender stereotype. And we covered initially up front, we talked about the gentleman, the CEO, the former board member from Uber. And of course, he talked about that now with another woman on the board, there's going to be more talking on the board. Another example of potentially a gender stereotype might be a comment like, hey, at a meeting, your colleague says that a project went wrong because there was a woman in charge, and they're basically insinuating that, women just can't handle projects. Now, again, it's hard to believe that something like that would happen today, but it really still does. So here's some examples to sort of start that conversation. And again, you can say, hey, I don't understand. Can you explain what you mean? And then, here's one that I really like, which is, hey, the fact that she's a woman really has nothing to do with her project management skills. And, let's not imply that it does. However, I do have some ideas on why the project failed, for one thing, and then you can go on and talk about the facts about the issues that did cause the project to go sideways, rather than focus on the fact that it has anything to do with gender, right? Just stick to the facts. Okay, this last one is very challenging, and it's one that I've often discussed with people because, it's pretty tough. And this goes back to when we talked about people bring different worldviews to the workplace, and people come from different positions. But this is all about compliments and how you handle them, how you give them, and how people react to them. So this is a well-dressed woman on the right. And so we're going to look at some things that maybe she's encountered. So somebody, a man specifically, might say, that suit looks very nice on you. Or, hey, join our photo. You're going to make us all look better. Or you're by far the best looking one in the bunch. And so these, and Scott, I'd love to engage with you a little bit and, get your reaction too on, kind of how do we think about this from both the man and a woman's angle? Because to be honest, part of the problem that we're having with these conversations is that they are not happening. People just don't say anything because they're afraid, right? They're afraid that they're going to be accused of being sexist if they give the compliment, and then the woman doesn't want to say anything, and there seems to be like a lack of trust. And so I think one of the things we can do is to move this into the forefront. So Scott, what are your kind of thoughts on these compliments?
Well, I think a lot, and you and I have talked a lot offline about these types of topics and situations. Oftentimes in my career, I've seen where comments like this are made, and they're made with the best of intentions, but oftentimes it can make the target of these compliments or of these statements to be very uncomfortable. And regardless of the intentions, if that's the outcome, then it's much better not being said. But one of the things I think you said earlier, Elba, is it's about capability, and it's about the skills you bring to the table. It's about the perspective, and oftentimes these types of comments can change the focus, and that's not good for the group and the conversation and all parties either. So this is we talked on the front end about how this is the uncomfortable side of the conversation. Because I can tell you, in my career, I probably have complimented lots of folks with the best of intentions. But again, if it makes someone stand out or be uncomfortable or just not be okay, then it's the wrong thing being said. So I like what you said, Elba. I mean, let's get this out. Let's talk about it. A lot of this this is probably the more pleasant side, if I said that right, the more pleasant side of this challenge we have in the industry, right? Right. Yeah. These statements are probably the easier things to address than a lot of things that go on that are blatantly wrong, unprofessional, uncomfortable. And I know that in our conversations, we've unfortunately experienced a lot of things that have no place in not just the workplace, but in any conversation.
Yeah, you're right. And so, actually you bring up some great points. So let's use this, as I mentioned early on, that one of the benefits to bring up a conversation is that you might be able to help to share information with people and just increase the level of understanding across your network. Right? So let's talk specifically, you made a great comment that maybe when you make some comments, it takes away from sort of the capabilities sort of mindset to more of, how you look or whatever. So why might people consider this offensive, right? We want to kind of understand both sides of the equation, and I've got some really good comments here on both sides. So people might consider it offensive, women I'm talking about who are getting the compliment, is because it sort of draws attention to your physical assets, the way you look, right? And back to capabilities at work, it really isn't about the way you look, it's about what you do. And so when women are, being complimented and focused on how they're looking, it just, me as a woman, right, it can be a little uncomfortable, because I think, well, gosh, I don't really need work people to tell, especially men, to tell me that I look good, right? It just makes me uncomfortable. But that's where people are coming from. It's like, women are made to feel like objects, like they're being observed as an object and their appearances. In addition, there's plenty of studies that show, unfortunately, that attractiveness is a bias that people benefit from, right? So there's plenty of studies that show when somebody looks good and is attractive, they're going to fare better in job selections and interviews, in project assignments, than a person who is not attractive and maybe they're heavier set, right? And so I think all of those things get us away from the capabilities, which is exactly what you're talking about. Now let's look at the other side of the equation, right? Which is this whole concept of, man, we can't even, talk as trusting partners anymore. If somebody is preparing for a big presentation and she's wearing a power suit and is looking great, I want to help boost her confidence. And so I might tell her that she looks great because I want her to go out there and do a terrific job on this tough presentation she's about to do. And so on the other side is the fact that, compliments are powerful. They can boost endorphins. They can really help with relationships, right? That you feel more confident, you're being inspired because you look good, and you can go out there and really show your capabilities. Again, however, it goes back to the context of work, right? And so at work, do we want all that noise involved? And so I want to tell you kind of how alternatives are to address this. And again, back to the costs and benefits, and it's an individual situational thing, right? Depending on the relationship with the person who's giving you the compliment, depending on what it is, it all depends.
Hey,
but
Elba.
Here's
Elba.
Yeah.
Hey, before we move forward, I'd love to pose this poll question and get the pulse from our audience on what their view of this is.
Awesome.
So let me do that. So to our audience, we're going to pose another question to you, and it's going to be a simple question. So based on the compliments that Elba laid out there, what's your take? Do you see anything wrong with this? So please select no, yes, or depends, and I think Elba would be keenly interested to get your take. And again, we promise the uncomfortable conversations, and there's a lot of gray area here, but as always, Elba is very thought-provoking, and it brings a lot of fantastic perspective to the supply chain space, as we're all, everyone needs to be comfortable on the team and be in an environment where they can succeed. So last call here, 5 seconds, and we will look at our results. Okay, so Elba, let's see what we have here. So from our audience, 12% voted no, nothing wrong. 6% voted yes. So to really illustrate that gray area that we're in, the twilight zone that we're in, 82% said depends.
Yep, and it really does, right? It's situational. It's back to what relationship, where are you, and the tone that the comment was given, right? It's one thing to say, that suit looks really great on you. You're going to do great on your presentation. And it's another one if they say, wow, that suit looks really good on you. So definitely matters. And I think maybe, yeah. I was going to say maybe we do the other poll question.
Sure. Absolutely, Elba. So to our audience, we have one final poll today, so stay with us here. We are going to share our final poll. And simple question, why might some women see this as inappropriate?
And I know I talked about that already, but I'm curious as what the audience thinks in their own point of view.
Absolutely. So answer A, if you take answer in the next 5 or 6 seconds here, objectifies women, sexual harassment, or they are hypersensitive. So please do vote now. And last call. Okay, we're going to close and share the results here, Elba. So overwhelmingly, 75% chose answer A, objectifies women, and the other two answers were split at 13% apiece.
Okay, got it. But you know, I totally can understand the hypersensitivity, right? It just depends on what your background is and how you grew up, you know? Okay, so what are some examples of how you could react and respond if you wanted to sort of start a conversation, right? So the first one is like, thank you. I'm just curious, do you say that to men? You know, the second one is funny. Thank you. Do you comment on your male coworkers' clothes? And then, you know, you just want to say thank you. You know, you're not offended. You think it's a very good compliment. You're happy. You know, always you want to appreciate somebody's good intentions, because remember, in any of these conversations, you want to assume positive intent. So Scott, I'm curious, okay, from the guy's point of view, do you ever compliment your male coworkers' clothes?
That's an excellent question. Rarely, in my background, rarely. A nice tie, a good set of shoes I can recall off the top of my head, but not very often.
Yeah, and so, you know, isn't that interesting, right? And these are the kinds of conversations, because it makes you think back, right? And then it makes you think, well, gosh, why don't I compliment men, right? Well, because that's just not a thing you do. Well, why do you compliment women? And you know, these why questions I love, because Scott, as you know, is part of Lean Six Sigma. It's the 5 whys, right?
Absolutely.
And to get to the root cause of a problem, you ask why 5 times. And ultimately, you know, if you ask it enough, you find that perhaps it's that, you know, women were always, you know, you're married, you think of your wife, you know, women are supposed to look nice. It goes back to, you know, women are nice and men are competent. But again, that goes back to the traditional stereotypes. And I think it does leave a legacy, and it does make you think twice when you do ask the question, well, gosh, do you compliment men on their clothes? Okay, so that's, I know it's a little sticky situation, and there are many ways to think about it, but the key of this webinar is really to just introduce you to these concepts, to give you some things to think about, to enable you to interrupt any biases, and to offer guidance to other people who may also not know how to respond. Okay, so as we're starting to wrap it up, let's go back through our checklist, because I think this is something that you can continue to apply. And quite frankly, it's not just for gender conversations. You can apply this thinking paradigm to any tough questions that you encounter at work or at home. So the first one is that, you know, we don't want to make assumptions. You want to give people the benefit of the doubt. You don't want to accuse people. You don't want to go to any type of motivation, what's in their heart. You just want to stick to the facts. The third one is you want to explain your reaction to the comment. You know, why are you having that reaction? The next is ask a question. As you've seen in our examples today, we've sort of posed a question. I don't get why that's funny, or can you repeat that? It gives you an opportunity to share information. So perhaps you can, you know, think about some things that you can now talk about in the future to share with people on why women might not like a compliment and why they might be offended. The next one is to try alternative approaches. Again, give people options of what they might say instead of complimenting. So even using the dressing item we talked about, right? If someone wants to support the person before they go give a big talk, you know, in the future, maybe rather than saying, you know, my suit looks great, say something like, you know, I know you're really prepared for this presentation. You're going to do a great job. You know, so you've given the person alternatives to think about for the future. Sometimes you just have to call it out and do it quickly because it's something that needs to be addressed. And then the last one, you always want to consider that in some cases you do want to go to somebody in authority, but probably as your last resort, because there are unfortunately penalties to your career from that. So I think that if you incorporate some of those concepts into the way that you interact when uncomfortable positions come up, you might feel like this guy right here who is cool in the shade rather than in the fire. So with that, Scott, I think we want to have some time for Q&A.
Definitely. Thank you very much for your perspective, Elba. So to our audience, I've got 12:44. We can easily take the next 10 minutes or so. We've got a couple questions submitted to our audience. Please submit your questions via the chat and toolbar. Here's one twist on that. If you've got an experience that you can share, you know, in a minute or less, 2 minutes or less, feel free to click on the raise your hand icon and we'll recognize you, and you can share an experience, kind of what Elba's walked us through, for the group's consideration. So we'd welcome that as well. So Elba, the first question comes from Jonathan, and Jonathan must have seen some of the Show Me 50 marketing material. So he wants you to tell him more about the lean in concept.
Okay, yeah. Lean in circles. So I'm sure people have heard of Facebook. The COO of Facebook is Sheryl Sandberg, and she wrote a book called Lean In. And the book, back in 2013, was about helping women understand that if they really want to compete and get ahead at work and rise to high levels of authority, they need to lean into their careers. They need to get a seat at the table and lean in at the table, be confident, and speak up and drive their own career. And that concept launched Lean In Circles. Lean In Circles are groups of women, and at Show Me 50, we are using them with men as well to engage in conversations, supportive conversations in a peer network where we talk about just these kinds of things, how women and men interpret different things at work. For example, we teach leadership, management, influencing skills. How are you able to leverage your communication skills, your strategic thinking skills to lean into your career and get the opportunities that you want? And so Lean In Circles are a place to come for 90 minutes and really explore those topics in a way that you couldn't necessarily do it at work, right? So you're sort of in a safe peer environment outside of the office. And so they're terrific experiences, and for Show Me 50, we do them over wine in Sandy Springs. So that's Lean In and Lean In Circles.
Excellent.
Thank you, Jonathan.
Great question, Jonathan. And the next Lean In Circle is August 21st. And having been a participant in the last one, I would definitely recommend it to any of our audience members that want to be part of these types of conversations. Okay, the next question comes from Selena. Elba, Selena asks, what is this APICS Atlanta task force that Scott mentioned?
Great. So APICS, of course, Scott talked about supply chain, end-to-end supply chain excellence, and they're doing some terrific things in Atlanta and in the Southeast. For the next membership year, which starts now in September, we've created a gender task force, and I'm chairing that. And what we're aiming to do is to really engage men in the conversation and the solutions that will close the gender gap in their companies. And we are also trying to get more women involved in supply chain. So we hear a lot about women in STEM and getting more women in tech. We want to get more women in supply chain management. We want to get more women certified, because research shows that certifications open doors for you, give you both credibility and give you capability. So we're trying to increase engagement of women in the certification process. We also want to help fill panel positions and speaking opportunities for women by creating sort of a pool of talented, capable women that can fill those roles. We're going to work on creating some training for boards, particularly nonprofit boards, like our very own APICS board and other professional organizations, to help the board members talk about these things, engage in these conversations, and see why they would benefit from having a gender diverse board. And lastly, we're trying to really talk about Show Me 50 and grow our Lean In Circle participation, because when men and women engage in the conversation, it does break down some of the misunderstandings and help us all create workforces where everyone is performing at their best and able to produce greater results for their company. So those are really the key missions of the group. The task force if you don't mind, Scott, I'd love to give a plug-in to my task force team, which is amazing. So I'm going to read off their names here. So we have Kevin Hackshaw, and he is terrific. He works at Purelator. We've got Teresa Williamson. She's from Vonderlande. Marcus Little, who's from Oakley, and Elizabeth Famos. She is a graduate student, and she is an industrial organizational psychologist. And lastly, Sarah Webb, our very own, she runs In Tandem Promotions. And so that crew, and as you can see, we definitely have some diversity there, is helping us to really get the message out and help Atlanta and Southeast supply chain organizations start these conversations to optimize the workforce. Thanks, Scott, for the question.
Absolutely. Great question, Selena and Jonathan. And Elba, quick follow-up. Elizabeth, who is a graduate student here at in the Atlanta area, is your resident data scientist. And as we all know, supply chain needs are changing and evolving. I've had numerous organizations approach APICS Atlanta, which offers a free job board, and tell me we are looking for data scientists on our team. So Elizabeth is up for a internship or part-time role in the Atlanta area. Is that right?
That's right. And you know, she's doing some amazing things because it's all about data. You can't get results with understanding your data. And so what she's done is she's taken our member database from APICS, and she has really analyzed it in charts and graphs to help us pinpoint exactly where we want to focus and how we're going to move the needle from our base number to our goals. So she's terrific.
So APICS for the 22nd century. I love it. So one quick point before we move into wrap up. We do need more women in supply chain. We need more women in industry. Many of you on the webinar today may be familiar with the 2015 study that APICS, the Manufacturing Institute, and Deloitte all led and compiled. And while women make up 47% of the labor force, they only make up 27% of the manufacturing workforce. That's a huge disparity. And I'll tell you, as someone that, my firm specializes in the talent acquisition space, we talk with companies all the time that are manufacturers in particular that are struggling to find talent. And then when I see the 20% disparity and think about the opportunity there, that's what we've got to make happen. We've got to catch up there because everyone benefits. Not only should women be provided an environment where they can have more opportunity and they can advance into top tiers of leadership like Elba has laid out there, but the organizations benefit, our supply chains benefit, our customers benefit. So huge opportunity, and I'm tickled, and our board is tickled here in Atlanta that Elba has volunteered her time to chair our efforts to do what we can in our neck of the woods to move the needle and get beyond lip service and really take action, which I know Elba is very passionate about. So with that said, Elba, any follow-up comments to any of that before we move into some final items?
No, I think I'm super excited to work with you guys, and I hope that our listeners reach out for both APICS and to come to our events, which I think we can right here, right? Our next steps. But yeah, thanks, Scott. It's a terrific opportunity. I know we're going to make a difference in Atlanta and the Southeast.
Terrific. So thank you for your time and perspectives today, Elba. We're going to be concluding our session this afternoon with just a few final items. First, the PDF version of this presentation and the recording will go out to each registrant. You can also find the recording as a podcast on iTunes and SoundCloud, which will probably be loaded up in the next few days. Also, we hope that you'll tune in for our next APICS webinar featuring Jamie Rentz with Chanalytics, who's going to be speaking on the topic of 4 demand planning resolutions for 2017. So Chanalytics is a wonderful industry-leading technology firm that does a lot of great work in the supply chain space. Going back to talk about data, as Elba was laying out earlier. This next webinar is going to be held September 13th, and more information can be found at apicsoutheast.org. If you're an APICS volunteer, or if you're interested in joining our new APICS Savannah chapter, we'd welcome you to join us in Savannah for our next APICS Southeast District meeting on September 15th and 16th. So in addition to a full Saturday on the 16th of professional development and leadership training, we also have the opportunity to tour the Georgia ports and one of the Gulfstream production facilities down there. So more information can be found at apicsoutheast.org. As always, feel free to reach out to me, Scott Luton, if there's anything we can do to serve as a resource for you and your organization. Elba, before we wrap up, any last thoughts today?
I would just encourage people to have these conversations, and maybe you can start off by starting at home where it's not as uncomfortable, and speaking with your spouse or significant other of some of the things that you hear in the news and get the male and female's perspective. And then maybe another baby step is that, on your lunch break with your peers at lunch, take an article, take a news item that has flashed recently and just have a discussion about it, right? Particularly if you can engage both men and women in that conversation, I think it'd be neat to start that conversation and see where people are in terms of their thinking.
Absolutely, and as we all know, supply chain makes it happen. We're the ones that can be the torchbearers and the trailblazers to drive a lot of this change. So I really appreciate your perspective today, Elba. So, of course, a big thank you to our audience for participating. On behalf of APICS Southeast District and Supply Chain Now Radio, this is Scott Luton concluding today's webinar series event. Wishing you a very successful week and weekend, and we hope to connect with you again real soon. Thanks, everybody.